Tonight's speaker, Stephen Bonnell, is also known online as Destiny, is a progressive political streamer and YouTuber known for his aggressive style of debating, openness to challenging conversations, and attention to detail when communicating with hostile audiences. Moderating tonight's conversation is Alex Tuckness, professor and chair of the Department of Political Science. He won a state championship in debate and a national championship in extemporaneous speaking in high school, and went on to earn his undergraduate degree from the University of Chicago, his master's from Cambridge University, and his PhD from Princeton, arriving at ISU in 1999. He is the author of 4 books on topics ranging from John Locke and religious toleration to the history of mercy and political thought. He has published more than a dozen journal articles and book chapters. Please give a warm Iowa State welcome to Stephen Bonnell and Professor Alex Tuckness.
Well, Stephen, thanks for being here. And, obviously, you're well known in debate circles now. And one of the questions I often hear people ask is something along the lines of, given how polarized things in society are, there's a worry that in debates, people just kind of cheer for their side rather than really being willing to be open-minded, to change their viewpoints and things like that. So how do you respond to people who think things are just so polarized, debates don't really make a difference?
I think I would just largely agree with them. I think something that's really important to understand is political beliefs. I was having a discussion with somebody actually right before this. People tend to be in certain social groups, and then those social groups are loosely or lightly informed by certain schools of thought or certain political beliefs, but people are always choosing for the social groups before any of the political beliefs. And I think that's a really important starting ground to understand why people believe the things they do. Because if you're knowledgeable on a topic and you start having a conversation with somebody, sometimes it becomes pretty apparent that the person has an incredibly high level of conviction for their conclusions without knowing much at all. And if you're trying to analyze it in terms of okay, well, why do you think this so strongly when you clearly know so little about it? It's very hard to make sense of that unless you come at it from that social dynamic first. You're part of this social group, and one of the tenets of the social groups is this particular belief. So once you understand that, I think you can maneuver into these worlds a little bit better, because now you have to realize that if you're trying to convince somebody of something, you have to do it in a way that's going to allow them to maintain attendance in this social group, because very few people are willing to break from all of their friends and family and everything over a certain political belief.
So how does that actually work? I mean, it seems like, following up on the kind of polarization point, does that mean sort of your goal is not so much to take somebody who's a conservative and hope to turn them into a liberal or vice versa, right, by the end of a debate, but it's maybe to nudge whoever it is a little closer to the center so that they are still close enough to be accepted by their group, but they're a little less extreme than they were previously?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to depend a lot on who is the debater here, right? So my goal in a conversation is going to be a lot different than a child to a parent, or a child to an uncle at Thanksgiving, or a friend to a friend in school, or a friend to another student in a different social group. All of the conversations are going to change depending on what your perspective is, who you are, the subject, and then who the other person is in the group they belong to. I'm just trying to think I'm trying to see, it's hard to generalize because the goal is so different depending on who you are and the style of the debate. So for instance, let's say I'm having a very bombastic debate against a Marxist-Leninist or a Nazi person, right? These are two schools of thought that I think I would say are illiberal, that I highly disagree with. My goal in these conversations might be to be as offensive and overbearing and make them look stupid or whatever, because that's how far apart our political beliefs are. And that might be the demeanor that they're coming at it with. But let's say that I'm talking to somebody that I would consider to be quite far from me. We'll say a Donald Trump supporter. But let's say they're relatively polite, and we have very far political disagreements. Like you said earlier, my goal might be, I just want you to either come a little bit closer to my side, or I want to plant like a couple seeds of doubt to maybe make you reconsider. And then like maybe at some time in the future, if you've heard enough of these or had enough of these things planted, it will kind of change your perception of a particular thing, right? So really common argument might be, people will say Donald Trump's economy was so much better than Obama's and everybody preceding that, which factually is kind of true. The market gains were slightly, I think, 2x higher than they were under Obama. But then the question would be for that person, okay, well, you think that Donald Trump's economy was really good. Like, what particular policy did he do that was good? A question like that, first of all, no offense, nobody likes Donald Trump is going to have an answer to that because they don't think in policies generally. To be fair, a lot of people on the left don't either, but they're not going to have an answer to that. And maybe like a question like that might get them thinking like, okay, well, did he actually do anything? Was it a particular policy? Was it something else? And then that's kind of the road that I try to get people to go down. I'm not going to immediately come at them with like, okay, well, tax cuts for the rich are bad and we need to invest in the homeless and blah, 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 because it's by the time I get to that point of the conversation, it's completely over. They're not even listening anymore.
Right, so sometimes the goal is to actually change a particular position, say on a policy that a person holds.
Yeah.
But it sounds like other times your real goal is maybe just to get them to hold their same opinion with a lower degree of certainty or a lower degree of confidence.
Yeah. Yeah, I think something, oh man, I wish I could remember. There's a guy, he's got a really goofy name. I shouldn't say that's his name. He's a really cool dude. Boghossian, I think. I don't know if he has an academic background. I think he did, but he does videos on YouTube where he'll go to colleges and he'll ask students like, give me your opinion on this thing, and then give me the level of certainty you have. And I think sometimes in a conversation, asking somebody for their level of certainty is a really good way to not only gauge where they're at, sometimes it forces them to reevaluate where they're at, which I think is really helpful. A more I guess bombastic way to do this online is I like to challenge people to bet on things, right? So when Tim Pool tweets out, Donald Trump is going to win in a 50-state landslide, I'm sure of it. Oh, you're sure of it? You want to give me 2-to-1 odds then on $10,000? Like, we'll bet on it. Usually when you start saying things like that,
right,
it's very surprising because sometimes people say things, I'm like, man, you're an idiot. But then when I make a challenge, all of a sudden I realize, oh, you do know what's going on. You're just being very hyperbolic. So like I might challenge somebody and say like, oh, you think there is there's a 100% chance that Russia is going to completely destroy Ukraine in, 2 more weeks of the war. Well, do you want to bet money on it? And then all of a sudden it's like, well, Ukraine is getting a lot of support from the West, and Putin's not as popular as he wanted. Like all of a sudden, it's like, oh, so you knew all these facts before, you just weren't considering them until somebody actually challenged you on it. So yeah, I think challenging people on levels of conviction is really important, and even getting somebody to have a little bit less conviction or to moderate what they're saying might be important as well. Yeah.
So one of the things that strikes me, so debates are about persuasion at some level.
Sometimes.
So
Ideally.
Yeah. They're about persuasion. They don't always succeed, right?
Well, sometimes they're not, right?
Well,
politicians talking to each other, just trying to spit out their talking points, and that's it, yeah.
Right, so you're right. So sometimes the debate might be more about energizing your base than persuading anyone, right? So people could have a variety of different goals. But it strikes me, political advertisements, for example, are also at some level trying to do a lot of those same things. And it seems like, if we accept your premise that you started off with, if a lot of times people are choosing the political positions they choose, not so much because they have, really thought and reasoned their way to a conclusion, but they're more sort of echoing the chorus that they've learned from the group that they're a part of. It seems like a lot of political advertisements are trying to work on people precisely in a non-rational way, right? They're using imagery and symbolism and hyperbole and all kinds of things that are designed to stir up those kinds of reactions.
Yeah.
So, to what extent do you try to use some of those same types of techniques when you're debating someone?
Well, I'm going to say something, but everybody says this, so it doesn't really mean anything. I try to keep all of my stuff pretty grounded. I think I have good arguments for why I'm able to do it and other people aren't. Namely that I actually don't market myself as a certain political ideology, so it gives me a lot more flexibility to explore things. So for instance, I was introduced as a progressive. I would say I'm still largely progressive, although they're running away a little bit for me. But I'm not committed to that position. I grew up in Omaha, Nebraska, which is I think 2.5 hours from here. I like like guns. I like self-defense. These are huge positions I have. That's probably never going to change. But I don't feel a lot of social pressure or a lot of people pushing me in one direction because I'm not like staunchly a member of a certain political group. Whereas, say tomorrow, the most comprehensive, best research paper in the world is released, and it shows that command economies and price controls and socialization of businesses and giving, like, socialism is the way to go. It's 100% proven. Even if that was the case, Ben Shapiro can't change his position, even if all the data said it, because he's the head of the Daily Wire, which is expressly a conservative outlet. He has no flexibility to explore something there, so all of his opinions are going to somehow, at the end of the day, however much uncomfortable mental incongruence he has to fight through, he's going to have to make it conservative at the end of the day. So, so when I'm arguing with people, I guess getting back to the original question, it was like, you're asking me, like, what is the goal, essentially, or what is my goal? It depends on who the person is and where they're coming at, and it depends on what the purpose of the particular conversation is. Something that you kind of started the question out with is debate is to persuade, or debate is to win an argument, or whatever. It's important to understand where the other person is coming from and what their goal is, because sometimes that will inform how you should approach the debate. I just debated some guy called Dan Cohen, who I found out later, I guess, is paid for. He does a lot of work with Russia Today, and his goal, I realize it's too late into the conversation, but like his goal was he just wanted to kind of like preach and say things, and then by the end when I started to push back, he pulled out his phone and wanted to like show clips of like a past stream of mine. I'm like, I don't know why you're showing me a 30-second clip. I'm right here. We can chat. But I realized, okay, well, you're not here to have like a conversation. You just want to like go for dunks or whatever. Mm-hmm. So in that situation, if that's their goal, then that has to be your goal too. You kind of have to lowest common denominator, depending on the type of argument. So if you realize that like a person is coming in, they want to have an honest conversation, the way that you approach that is going to be a lot different than if it's a person that's coming in that's just trying to make you look bad, versus, we can talk about any of these particular archetypes, but I can go on for any type of strategy. Just it's going to severely depend on who you're talking to, So
one of the things that affects your strategy then is kind of an assessment of the motives of the person you're debating, right? Trying to figure out, is this someone who's actually open to reasoned dialogue, someone who actually might change their opinion if the evidence really was good, or the logic or whatever was better for the other side, and other people who you know are just going to be intransigent and may not even have anything other than just getting their talking points heard by more people as their goal. So that changes your view. Let's talk a little bit about the different formats in which debate can happen, right? So obviously, there's one sort of debate, some of the students who are here might be having in a week, when they, find themselves sitting down for Thanksgiving with, their uncle who has completely different political beliefs from them, right? And things get, heated over turkey, right? That's one kind of scenario. Internet debates with people you've never met in person or likely to never run into again are very different, right? So how does some of those factors, like, whether you're likely to interact with a person again, whether it's in person or digital, how do those change your approach?
Whether it's in person or digital, I don't think in person or digital necessarily changes it. It's highly correlative what type of people you'll be talking to in person versus digital. Like in person, you're way more likely to be having conversations with people that are friends or family, or maybe even other students that might be in different social groups or disagree with you on things. So the way that you approach those conversations is going to be a lot different than online, which might just be, you might be like in a debate forum or on Twitter or social media, where the goal is to just attack and attack and attack, because that's all people do on social media. If you're talking to people in real life, one way to approach the conversation, again, this is something, I'm probably going to repeat this a lot because people need to get this out of their mind. There's two huge things for human behavior. One is, like, humans are not fundamentally truth-seeking machines. Okay, it is absolutely not true. We all thought that when the internet came out, everybody would be a super genius because it's the internet, all the information is there. That is not how the internet is used, okay? So humans are not fundamentally truth-seeking machines, and our political beliefs are inherited from our social groups. Always start from these two positions, and it helps you understand things a little bit better. When social groups are constructing beliefs, or the members in those social groups are getting their beliefs, a lot of it is kind of tied into kind of like these emotional loadings at certain points, or these more like fundamental kind of like moral values you might have relating to certain things. And people are going to defend those moral points more than the point itself. And the goal is if you can get into the moral point, then you can maybe change one of the overlying beliefs, but you have to hit at that fundamental moral point. So here's two examples I can give to that to more clearly express this. I think that, in my opinion, homelessness is one of the worst problems in the United States. Not in terms of scope or cost, but just in the idea that we are the wealthiest country on the planet and we have so many homeless people. It's unbelievable. If you've ever been to the West Coast, it's unbelievable how many homeless people are in LA, San Francisco, Seattle. It's unreal. When people argue about homeless issues, though, what a lot of people do is they have this value, their emotional value is like, I don't want homeless people, but that value gets imprinted on what I would argue are really horrible policies like rent control. And people will tie in that I want to save homeless people with rent control. And then if you go to argue with that person and you try to argue against rent control, they don't perceive you as arguing against rent control. They think that you hate homeless people. And the conversation will immediately go back there. So if you can try to get in between that process and say, hey, listen, I agree with your core value here. I just think rent control is a bad way to get it done. Like, that's the way that you have to approach that conversation. But there's like, in order to do this, there's a lot of thinking you have to do to like even figure out what is the driving emotional or moral thing to push somebody in that direction. I actually asked you about this example up there. Another really common one is when I'm arguing with conservatives about children that want to do puberty blockers. A lot of conservatives have really strong opinions about this. It's so easy for conservatives because one of their biggest fundamental kind of like engines for belief usually have to do with freedom from government oppression, freedom from institution, the ability to do what you want to take care of your family. And it's very easy for me to have a conversation with a conservative and say, hey, listen, I have a 12-year-old son. He has ADHD. The conversation that was between him, me, his mother, and his doctor was a really challenging conversation. And we had to make really tough decisions about how do we feel about this medication. Why would I ever want the government to get into that conversation? And when you phrase it like that, and you're hitting at that emotional thing of like freedom from government, freedom from external intervention, it's really, really hard for the conservative to come back and go, well, I actually think the government should be involved. Like, they're never going to say that, you know? So those are like two examples of when you're trying to change somebody's personal belief, nobody actually has any idea why they think the policies that they do. They're always powered by these underlying emotions. And if you can identify the underlying emotion, you can try to get like in between that and then push them to a different policy perspective.
Good. Yeah. So if we're thinking in terms of like levels, right? So people will sometimes have what we'll call this moral level, where there's a series of moral convictions they may have. Things like it's important to help the homeless, or the government shouldn't be telling families how to conduct themselves, right? And so your point is you're more likely to have success if you can affirm one of those core values that they have and then try to show them the policy they're advocating for doesn't lead to the conclusion they think.
Exactly, yeah.
They think it does.
But that requires a very high level of, you have to be intelligent enough to trace that back, and you have to be empathetic enough to phrase it in a way. This is more like rhetorical strategy than the logic of this debate, but like you have to phrase it in a way that's like really emotionally getting to those core beliefs and doesn't just make it sound like you're trying to trick them or trap them, right? Because like for that same conversation, if I could just give the speech I did about my son, and that's a true story. My son is 12, he's got ADHD. That was a very challenging conversation. But if I come at that conversation and I'm like, okay, well, we had to give our kid drugs and I don't want the government involved in that. So why do you want the government involved in some things and not other things, right? Well, then they're going to look at me and we're going to fight, right? Because I don't have that same empathetic approach. It doesn't even sound like I truly believe in their value. It seems like I'm throwing it in their face and then I'm trying to call them a hypocrite and attack them over it. So
good. Tell us a little bit about how you go about preparing. So obviously, like when you realize you're going to be debating someone, sometimes there'll be a specific topic that's going to be the subject of the debate. How do you go about preparing?
I'm sorry. I start every answer off with it depends. So it depends on the type of topic, the level of depth of knowledge I need in it, and then the types of people I'm going to be debating about it. So if I'm having a conversation about I just did a debate, I think a week ago about socialism versus capitalism, and I know that the other person isn't like a PhD econ student. I just have to be because I debate so much, right? I've been doing streaming for 14 years, politics for 7 or 8 years. Because I debate so much, I've got a lot of kind of surface level knowledge on a lot of things. And if the other person hasn't had these conversations, I'll probably know most of what we're going to talk about. Two things I would say are really important for approaching debates in general is one is you have to know your argument and the counter argument. At the very least, you should be able to go back and forth quite a bit. At least 3 or 4 levels deep in an argument. There are a surprising number of people that I meet that will come at me with a very high conviction for an argument, and I'll ask them what I would consider to be the most basic retort, and they're completely stumped. And that's just mind-blowing to me, yeah, because they haven't spent any time at all. So that might be one thing, is I'll exploit both sides of an argument. If it's going to be something that's going to require more specialized knowledge, so like the Russia invasion into Ukraine was a big one, or right now the Israel-Palestinian conflict, which is an ongoing another big one. These are things where to have strong convictions or to even be able to place like a reasonable argument, I might spend like a week or two doing background reading before I come to that particular argument. And usually the background reading is going to revolve around like, what is the scholarly consensus in this area? And then like, do I feel like the justifications are good? And then like, what are the criticisms of that? And then it'll be that kind of thing. Very, very, very rarely am I positing like novel theories about anything, because I'm a music school dropout. I'm 34. I spend all my time on the internet. I'm not about to submit a paper to a journal or something with my novel theory and anything. So I'm generally following consensus and then trying to understand why the consensus is what it is. Yeah. If something for, or maybe you guys don't feel this way because you guys are college kids and I did music and we didn't read a lot of papers, but sometimes it can be daunting to do research. But the reality is for really big topics, there's not like a billion papers. There's usually like 2 or 3 or 4 like preeminent authors in a field, and then a few really big papers on certain topics. So if you want to get acquainted with the literature, it might be like a couple of really big meta-analyses or a couple of landmark studies. You don't have to actually read like 500 unique papers to figure out a position on the minimum wage or something. Yeah.
Yeah, so how do you talk about a little bit about some of the tools you use when you're trying to do that? So it's one thing to say, hey, just go find here's the 4 articles, and if you read those, you'll really have a pretty good sense of the variety of opinions and all that. Mm-hmm. But the internet being what the internet is, sifting through the bad stuff to get to the good stuff can often be difficult. So what are some of the tools or resources you've found helpful? On that point, I actually super disagree with that. I think it's interesting. Okay. A lot of people say that it's hard to find the good from the bad. The reality is if you read, so if we start with news, even if you're watching, wait, real quick, show of hands. Who's like conservative here? Oh, okay. Not as many. Okay, cool. All right. I try to bash both sides when I do these speeches because I don't want the audience to think I'm like on one side or the other. But like, even if you read all of like only Fox News, or even if you read only, I guess like CNN, if you're reading the full article, you will be more informed than 98% of people on an issue, right? When people talk about like media bias, for instance, it drives me crazy. I think it should be illegal in the United States, actually. You shouldn't be allowed to do entertainment and punditry alongside news because people are apparently too stupid to tell the difference. People will say things like, Fox News reporting is highly inaccurate. And then I'll be like, well, what do you mean by that? And they'll say, well, Tucker Carlson said this. Tucker Carlson is not a reporter. He's not writing news articles. He's like an op-ed pundit guy. So people can't tell the difference between the two. Oftentimes when people are uninformed on an issue, it's very, very, very rarely they read the wrong stuff. It's almost always they haven't read anything beyond headlines or Twitter things. Even for really complicated topics, I'll like, for anything, I'll just go to Wikipedia and I'll start reading. And if I see a word and I don't understand it, I'll click the next article and I'll read that. And if I see something there and I don't understand it, I'll click that. And just by Wikipedia alone will give you a good like backbone on stuff. And then usually an article might mention something that might be controversial. From there, you can Google for popular articles that are written about it at the time. Usually there will be certain historians that are referenced. So with regards to like the Israel-Palestine stuff, right? Like for the new Israeli historians, right? Like Benny Morris is going to be brought up a lot. Avi Shlom is going to be brought up a lot. Ilan Pappé, I think, is going to be brought up a lot. These are people who, even if you don't want to read their whole books, you can at least Google passages in their books about certain things. You can read that, but yeah. Sorry, that was a long answer. I would say for research, starting with like a basic history, so whether that might be a history book about a thing or even like a Wikipedia article, starting with the skeleton will allow you to read more news articles or op-eds or opinions that can help you fill in stuff in the middle, as you do your research. Yeah. But any amount of like, if you spend 2 hours studying anything, you will be more informed than 98% of people on the internet. I swear to God, even if other people in my position don't know anything about most of the topics they talk about. So how do you change your strategy if you know you're going to be dealing with someone for whom the basic facts are going to be a lot of what it's hard to arrive at consensus on? So maybe they buy into conspiracy theories that you think are just, ridiculous, but they're strongly committed to these things, and conspiracy theories often have, they're kind of loops built into them where they kind of include their own explanations for contrary data. Uh-huh. So it seems like that's going to be a more difficult kind of conversation to have sometimes. So how do you approach those kinds of conversations?
Man, I get this conversation a lot. My mom believes this and blah, 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 blah. How do I debate her? My mom is an avid Trump supporter. She's a ride or die Trump supporter to the end of the earth. So if I knew how to debate family members out of things, I would have done it by now. I should remember the name of this paper. There's a really interesting paper I read, a 20-page paper on the differences between echo chambers and epistemic bubbles. And I thought this paper was really interesting because it pointed out two very different types of people. Some people can get stuck in something called an epistemic bubble. And the idea of this is when you go onto a social media feed, all of the information is tailored a certain way, and you kind of only get one opinion, and that's like all you've ever seen on something, right? People in an epistemic bubble, if you're talking to somebody who just gets news from one area, you be gentle with them and you show them a couple other things, and they might go, first of all, this is one thing, nobody will change their mind on the spot ever. I don't change my mind on the spot ever. I don't change my mind on the spot when I argue with my wife. Okay, I never change my mind on the spot. So don't ever expect anybody to change their mind on the spot. But if you show them something, sometimes that can serve as like the impetus, like, maybe I don't know everything about this issue, and I'll at least keep my mind open to other stuff. Those are people in epistemic bubbles. Other people are in far more epistemically destructive things called echo chambers. And the author of this paper, he identified what an echo chamber does is not only are there like singular sources for epistemic authority, meaning it might be a few key figures that you can trust, those echo chambers also actively spend time discrediting outside voices. If I knew how to interact with those people, I'd be like a billionaire because I would have sold like the best thing ever. Those types of people are incredibly difficult. You have to either have a personal relationship, kidnap a family member. I don't know, like you have to have some crazy leverage on a person like that, or a very intimate connection to change their mind. Because the issue with so if we might be talking about something related to if I want to have a debate with somebody who's like opposed to vaccines, or they think that vaccines are like the new ones are literally trying to poison you, kill you, they don't work or whatever. The problem is that all of my traditional sources of authority have already been discredited in their eyes. I can't cite something by the CDC. The CDC is literally ran by Fauci, who's not even head of state. The CDC is literally owned by Big Pharma. I can't give you studies because studies are done by Big Pharma. I can't point to academic institutions because they're taken over by woke leftists. I can't point to anything that Biden says because obviously he's not even a real president. He's a puppet, right? So, for those people, you have to employ. It's like a whole arsenal of different type of rhetorical strategies and tricks to argue with them. But at the end of the day, I don't know how you even begin to. Yeah, it's very, 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 very challenging. But the important thing is what I said at the beginning: identify like what kind of person you're dealing with, so that you don't waste your time. Yeah.
Like one category, like if people are wanting to get better at debating. So obviously, we've talked some about just becoming more knowledgeable about the topic. We've talked about doing some research so that you, or thinking about the type of opponent, right, that you're going to be talking to, what they're like, what their tendencies are, things like that. Are there any good resources you would recommend just on debate skills in general?
This is a hard one. This might be a little bit cringe, but I would compare debating, like if you're a guy that's like talking to girls, like you can watch like a million YouTube videos on it, but you kind of just have to do it if you want to learn how to do it. To get good at debating, you have to have a lot of conversations with people, and you have to practice a bunch of things, and you've got to see what fails where, and then you've got to be willing to go back and try it again. I don't like, in terms of resources to prepare for it, like there are general guidelines that you can get, but I would compare it to doing music. Actually, it's probably true of all art. It should be true of everything. Actually, it should be true of everything. If you give speech, if you do like speech or whatever too, the most important thing you can probably do to prepare is when you have a conversation, if you can, record it. If this is a two-party state, make sure the other party has a consent and blah, blah, blah. But record the conversation and like go back and watch it and see like how do you feel like you came off at all points in the debate. Were you being empathetic enough? Were you being understanding to their side? Showing empathy is a really big part of getting somebody to agree with you. Were your points logically consistent? Could an outside person follow like basic syllogistic logic? Are you saying, A, then B, therefore like here's your conclusion? Were you correct on the facts? Did you get something, factually incorrect? Were you cutting the person off or raising your voice? Like there's a whole host of things, but yeah, practice is the most important thing. And then if you can, record it and reviewing it to do it are also important things. Yeah. Yeah,
that sounds really important, but it's also hard, right? Because it involves the ability, like when you're in the debate, often, the adrenaline kicks in, the desire for victory kicks in. Sometimes you're also arguing for positions you feel very strongly about. So even watching yourself and recording, it takes a certain amount of distance and self-reflection to realize I didn't do a good job of listening there. I didn't have the right tone there. Actually, I think I stated that position with a lot more confidence than the facts actually warrant.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting, as you say that, like a lot of the things that people often talk about being missing in debates are exactly the sort of thing an individual needs by way of self-critique if they're actually going to get better at it.
Yeah, but you have to be willing to humble yourself going into that position, because you're probably not the best. Like, I still make so many mistakes that even I'm like still actively working through. I tend to be too destructive in arguments instead of constructive. Sometimes I attack, and I don't bother building a positive case myself. That would be like one big critique. Sometimes I'll get, it's important, this is more like a rhetorical strategy, but like when you're arguing with somebody, it's important to let them get mad first, because then your anger seems righteous, whereas if you get mad first, you seem like a huge bully. That's like a rhetorical strategy. Ironically, it's very, very true, it works. There are a lot of things that even in my own stuff, like I could dramatically improve here. You also can get very emotionally caught into positions, and again, this still happens to me, and every single person has done this in their life at some point, where you're so emotionally heated in a debate, you might go back and look at the end of it and remember, and you're like, oh my God, like why was I even arguing this point? I know this is so stupid. Like if you hate the person enough, or if they've got you wound up enough, you might be arguing like 1 + 1 = 3, and like sourcing like non-Euclidean geometry to like try to make, like you're like going crazy, and it's like you're out of pocket. You need to like, chill out. Unironically, there might be like DBT, like therapeutic techniques where, like, if you realize that you're becoming emotionally dysregulated, it's really good to kind of take a step back, because once a person has hit a certain level of emotional dysregulation, like psychologically, neurobiologically speaking, your brain is shut off. You're not like in a logical thinking mode. You're like in a character preservation mode, and all you're doing at that point is fighting to save yourself, and all the conversation is gone. So all the good conversation is gone. So you are right that recognizing this in the heat of the moment is incredibly challenging. But the most important thing you can do, I notice that a lot of everybody, if you're an amateur in anything, a lot of people think that professionals are just so good on the fly with every single thing they do in their life. But the reality is the difference oftentimes between a professional and amateur is a professional sets themselves up for success. And sometimes good preparation is the best thing that you can do. So making sure that you're calm, you're well rested, you're not drinking if Red Bull set you off. Make sure that you know your own personal limitations, right? If you're part of the LGBT community, maybe debating trans issues with Charlie Kirk fans is not like a good thing you ever want to do. If you're a really big conservative, debating, staunch Bernie Sanders supporters might not be the thing for you, but yeah.